Welcome back to AgriTalk at the National Ethanol Conference in Orlando, Florida. Bliss Baker joins us, Executive Director for Global Renewable Fuels Alliance. We have more numbers showing the economic impact of the ethanol industry, not only in the United States, but really around the world. And Bliss, you and I were just talking. When you look at how this industry has changed over the last 10 to 20 years, who would have thought? A lot of people would have never believed back then that the ethanol industry would contribute 10% of our gasoline supply in this country now. I mean, that fuel supply, 10% of it, that's a significant number.
Oh, there's no question about it. If you had said to the oil industry in 1995, we're going to take 10% of your U.S. gasoline market, you would have been laughed out of the room. But that's where we're at today. Globally, we're not quite there yet, but we're making inroads globally and slowly taking over gasoline and diesel markets with biofuels. The beachhead, of course, is the United States, Brazil, and Europe. But we're making inroads, and there's a lot of people employed in this industry now that didn't have these jobs 10 years ago.
Let's talk about that, because jobs is something that resonates with people certainly anytime, but especially when jobs are hard to come by. We keep hearing about unemployment. Here's an industry creating jobs.
Oh, no question about that. We talk a lot about the environmental benefits of ethanol and biodiesel, but there are 1.3 million people globally that are employed in this industry. And by 2020, we expect that number to go to 2.2 million people that are employed somehow in the biofuels industry.
Then you extrapolate those numbers out. Jobs, I mean, people have earnings that they get put back into communities and regions, and it trickles through. I mean, that's how you get the economy going again.
No question. The economic output of the industry globally is in excess of $300 billion, and that is not a small number. I know we're still small in comparison to the oil industry, but we're chipping away at it, and $300 billion of economic output is not something to sniff at.
We keep hearing about exporting ethanol, a lot of U.S. ethanol production getting exported, so obviously there's a demand globally for ethanol.
Well, there's no doubt. 10 years ago, we always looked forward to the day where ethanol would be traded as a commodity, shipped country to country. I think we're seeing today the maturing of the industry. There's now trade tensions between countries over ethanol. We're seeing some of that. I think that's a sign that the industry has grown up, and there's a lot of market tensions. Ethanol clearly is a traded commodity now globally, and that's a good sign for the industry.
So what's the next hurdle in taking that to the next step then?
Well, I think domestically in the United States, obviously E15 is something that's got to happen. Brazil is still continuing to grow their market, but we've got to see other countries adopt biofuels-friendly policies. We're seeing that now. There are a number of countries in Africa, for example, that are starting to build plants. I've been dealing the last couple of weeks with a group in Tunisia that's building a large biodiesel plant. It's never been done before in North Africa. There are several countries like Thailand, Tanzania, Peru that are all looking at biofuels for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is to reduce their crippling reliance on crude oil. Many of these countries are net importers of oil, and if you're a developing country and you're importing oil, that's a pretty serious tax on your economy when oil prices shoot up from $90 to $110 a barrel.
And that growing demand then really gives a foundation to a developing cellulosic ethanol industry.
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, what American policymakers have succeeded in doing here, I believe, here in Brazil, but particularly in the United States, is they've built a foundation on which the next generation will be built. And I always like to use the analogy of the television set. You know, we've created the black and white color TV set here in America, and the flat screen is on the way. There will be something after that and something after that. We don't know what it will be, but we've built the foundation now. And corn ethanol is a tremendous contributor to the economy, the environment, but the next generation is going to have incredible promise. But that wouldn't be possible unless we first created that grain ethanol business or the first television set. We need to grow on that.
Which is interesting in the political debate, because a lot of controversy, a lot of debate around tax incentives. Okay, We've now moved away from VTEC, the tax incentives for corn ethanol, and now the debate is over tax incentives for cellulosic ethanol. I think we can look back at corn and say, hey, those incentives help build what we've just talked about, and now we need that help to get the cellulosic up and going because that is the future.
Well, we've got the blueprint, right? The policymakers and legislators in this country and others in Canada that have been very successful in building the first generation industry should never apologize for having done that. The incentives worked. The mandates have worked. We built a massive industry here that has $300 billion in output globally, most of it driven by policies and some financial support for the industry. The roadmap is there. They need to do the same thing for cellulosic ethanol to get that next generation of development underway.
When you talk about plants being built in Africa, now what are they using as feedstock?
A variety of things. Jatropha, which is a plant that can be grown on marginal land. Some grains in southern Africa. There's still a lot of wheat and corn there. In northern Africa, they're using oils. There's some palm oil there. There's a variety of feedstocks, but more importantly, they have a lot of biomass and a lot of land. So the next generation of technologies that come along, and if they're able to adapt those technologies, southern Africa has over 1 billion hectares of arable land, rain-fed arable land that's not being used. That is a huge opportunity for those countries, and if you can get access to that biomass and use the biomass to make biofuels, it will do a number of things. The World Bank, for example, said this is one of Africa's huge opportunities, is to get access to that biomass and make biofuels.
The World Bank and some of those groups are finally, they've had to come back and say, hey, we misspoke earlier about it causing food shortages and problems in feeding people. They're starting to realize the positive impact that biofuels actually have.
Nothing gets my blood boiling more than groups like the World Bank. They stopped short of apologizing, of course, but 2 and 3 years ago, they were demonizing our industry, fed by misinformation and a bias led by a bunch of NGOs, many of them European groups that don't understand our industry, don't care to understand our industry, but there's been a lot of reports in the last couple of years that have come out and vindicated our industry. The World Bank itself has come out and said that biofuels are a huge opportunity for Africa. It will kickstart investment in agriculture, and it will produce employment and economic opportunity.
How it all shapes out remains to be seen, but one thing seems to be pretty obvious. The demand for biofuels globally is there now. That's no longer a question of whether or not we're going to have them. It's what shape, what form, who's going to produce them, how it's going to be done.
No doubt. Globally, we still have many countries that are very slow to adopt policies, but there are a number of countries now moving in that direction. The biofuels industry last year displaced the equivalent of 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil in 2011. 1.2 billion barrels. I mean, that was unthinkable 10 years ago. It was probably unthinkable 5 years ago. We expect that to reach over 2 billion barrels in 2020. So it's now, I like to say that the biofuels industry is prime time now. We've got a critical mass here. And as other countries in Europe and parts of Africa and Asia start to adopt biofuels-friendly policies, we're going to see a real move towards taking 10% of the gasoline and biodiesel market from the oil industry.
Good to talk to you again. Thanks, Bliss.
Thanks for having me.
That's Bliss Baker, Executive Director of the Global Renewable Fuels Alliance. All right, with that, we'll wrap up today's broadcast from here at the National Ethanol Conference in Orlando, but we have much more to come tomorrow. Hope you'll join us right here on AgriTalk, the voice of rural America.